So what we're looking at here is a hard light. What you're going to notice is that the edges of the shadow are very distinct and refined. Now, as I move the light closer, the relative size of the light to the subject becomes a lot larger. Therefore, the edges of the shadow become a lot softer. This is softening the light. Now, there's another way that we can soften the light, but the principle is the same. I can leave the light in the same place, but I can introduce a diffusion sheet. As you can see, the shadow now is very diffused and very soft. When I take it away, it's much harder and very soft again. And the reason for this is the diffusion sheet is expanding the size of the light source as it scatters it across. So just to recap, hard light is light with a high contrast and a very hard defined shadow. It creates a very intense and strong look, created by the light source being small relative to our subject. Converse to this, we have soft lighting. Soft light is light with low contrast and very soft gradated shadows that aren't very defined. It creates a more calming look, and it's created by using a large light source relative to the subject. Now, it's important to remember that these two things aren't binary. The hardness and softness of a light exists on a spectrum. It can be more or less hard. We decide how hard we want the light to be based on how we want our audience to react to our image. The next thing that we're going to look at is manipulating natural light. Now, we can take natural hard light and make it quite soft. We can also take natural soft light and make it hard, but this tends to be more difficult than it's worth doing, and normally in this circumstance, we just replace it with an artificial hard light source. So how do we go about creating a soft light source? So let's focus on creating a soft light source. So say we're outside photographing our subject. Why might we actually want to soften the light source? Well, first off, if we have very hard light sources, it can create quite strong shadows on the person's face, and that can be quite distracting. Also, because of the high contrast, we might find that we don't have enough dynamic range in the camera, so that the brightest part is very, very bright and the darkest part is very, very dark, and we don't capture enough detail about our subject. Another reason is that we actually want to affect the way that the light looks. Hard light on a person, and particularly women, can be quite unflattering. So if we soften that light up, it can soften their features and make them more appealing. How am I softening the hard light of a sun? What you want to do is diffuse it. The way that diffusion works is we pass that hard light through a barrier, and that barrier will scatter the light. So rather than it traveling in a straight line, being very focused, it scatters the light in very many directions. And what this effectively does is soften the light, and it expands the size of the light source as it's spread over the scale of our diffusion sheet. Now you might be thinking, what is a diffusion sheet? This is a diffusion sheet. What I can do is I can place light coming through this, where it comes through hard on this side. It spreads through the surface of this diffusion sheet, and it makes it much softer. So what we want to do when we're outdoors is we put that sheet in between the sun and our subject, and it will soften up the light source. Now, we can actually double this effect if we want the light to be even softer, and we can use multiple diffusion sheets. Now, you don't have to buy one of these. There's lots of options that you can use out there for diffusion. You can actually, one common example I've seen is using tracing paper. Literally any translucent material that allows some but not all light to pass through will soften the light source. Now, the next way that we can start to soften up the lighting of an image is we can soften the shadows. Now, I'm actually softening the shadows slightly here. To my right, there's a whiteboard. And what this whiteboard is doing is it's taking the light that's coming in from the left and it's bouncing it off here, and it's filling in the shadows on my face. Now, this doesn't technically make the light source softer, but it does reduce the light source's contrast. So what we might want to do in the real world is we might want to take the light source as it's shining onto the face of our model, scatter it through the diffusion sheet, and then on the other side of them to the right have a whiteboard like this to add light on their other side and reduce the contrast. And an alternative to this is we can use a mirrored reflector. So if you imagine silver tinfoil, now what that does, it ensures the light that bounces back is much harder, and that's because of the metallic nature of tinfoil in this instance, for example, ensures that the light keeps traveling in the same, or roughly the same direction that it hit the substance with. If we like the hard lighting, we can use a hard reflector to ensure that we maintain that hard lighting, but are able to add some more light into the shadows. And then finally, rather than using a silver reflector, we can use a gold reflector. And this is great around the time of sunset when we know that the light coming from the sun is going to be much warmer and we want to match that. So let's recap. We can soften a natural light source by putting a translucent sheet in between the light source and our subject. We can use bounce cards to add light into the shadows and reduce contrast. And we can use reflectors to maintain the hardness of the light and change the color.